The main thing Mesmer will be doing is you should be getting extremely high on strips on either of the builds. The Chronomancer outputs a lot more CC and is a lot more utility friendly than the Virtuoso. The Virtuoso can do pretty good focused damage and should be outstripping Chronomancers. In terms of the build, you'll be using Illusion, Domination, and your special tree. You want the Shatter and the Phantasm Distortion. Cooldown reduction is a big reason you're in this tree, because your Shatters are one of your bigger butts of your strips. Go for the improved, you hit more targets. Domination, if you don't want to use Greatsword for whatever reason, you can run either of these, they're both okay. If you don't want to run Greatsword, I would run bottom one, so your Shatters give vulnerability. You run that trait, the other two aren't as good, so the stripping is good, you get a lot of strips if you learn how to shatter. Third one, it depends. The extra shatter damage is quite a lot, or you can run Vicious because you'll be interrupting, disabling a decent amount. If you need more strips, run that. If you need more damage in the squads, run the other one. Your damage isn't going to be great as a Chrono or a Virtuoso for that matter. And then the increased cooldown on interrupts isn't consistent, so not worth running over the other two. You're better off getting more strips and killing the person. For your Chronomancer tree, just disabling slows. The slow is quite nice. You can also run Well's heal when they end, but I only run the single Well you'll be targeting on yourself, and then G-Well will usually be pretty out of range, and don't run heal stats anymore, in my opinion. Second, you want the stronger Alacrity on yourself. It makes a really big difference. Drop some of the concentration. You don't need it as major, and everything will be applying a lot of Alacrity overall. Then your Grandmaster in Chronomancer tree. Either Stretch Time or Seize the Moment are good. It depends on your party. If you're with a Druid, you generally don't need the Alacrity. If you've got a Support Scourge, you often won't need the Alacrity, but you can always run it. It's always nice. If you're in somebody's party that was actively using res skills, so if they're using their banners for reses with Berserkers, or Firebrands using quickness, and you're noticing they're not properly applying quickness for their signet, I would personally run Seize the Moment, because it's every time you shatter, you'll be applying quickness, and for the 2-second cast time skills, there's quite a big difference in getting it off versus getting interrupted. In terms of gear, main stat sets I would run is Commanders or Wanderers. Usually I run a mix. The reason I've switched away from Minstrels, which is what we used to run on the support Chronomancer, is purely because the healing is a complete waste overall. It's such a negligible thing. Yeah, you can run Celestial as well, but I find most of the stats in Celestial aren't needed, so I like the cleaner, just damage and concentration with decent amount of survivability. Adding damage to the build for support Chronomancer, you add the damage because when you're running Greatsword, you have complete reliability on being able to target down to 1200 range. Nothing except Aegis and active skills can block your Greatsword 1, so you can use it to target any down. Of course, this doesn't mean just focus downs and get out of position and everything, but if the squad's struggling to finish some, you can kill them pretty reliably. In terms of weapons, it's a lot of personal preference. I run Greatsword, Sword Focus. The reason I run Sword is mostly for the 2. It locks you in place, gives you a lot of distortion. Yeah, for Chrono. Focus is mandatory entirely because Temporal Curtain, it's the most reliable pull for commanders, so one of your weapon sets should have a focus, and you should be pulling on the commander's request. The immob from your 3 is quite nice with sword as well. The 2 is just a full second of invulnerability, which is enough time usually to get one of your other skills. Reason you run Greatsword, and if you are running Greatsword, you run the Bountiful Blades perk, is your 4 is good strips. Yeah, leaps the free clone, it's quite nice. Because getting 1 clone is valuable, especially when setting out. Your 2 is unblockable, so you can throw out your 2 and you'll always be getting a guaranteed clone on them. Throw out your 2, and if you need the extra second because you're about to continuum split, you can do that, otherwise you have your shatters. I just don't think you get enough value out of the support. You can run it, but when you're running this build with the damage, you can run it with Lear. That's the relic I run. If you're not comfortable with it, just run a basic damage one, or you can run Ceres. But I run Lear on it because that's 50% mitigation essentially to your party, because it splits the damage on them and then you can eat it with so many skills. Yeah, the other options for weapons are, if you have Soto, Dagger is pretty good. Your 2 is a very very easy clone generation skill. Your 3 is pretty good damage, but it's all projectile based, so you'll be hitting yourself with reflect if you have auto cast on your 1. If you're running, or if you don't want to run your greatsword, yeah, you heal them with the well, but you have so much alacrity that your well's pretty short cooldown, and you're mostly timing it for the initial damage because you don't want to accidentally leer. That's why I'm not running it with inspiration. If you run the other heals, you can run it, but you want to be deleting the damage with your distortion, with your blocks, and with your sword too. You can obviously run shield. This is, instead of greatsword, I would personally run dagger focus in one set and sword shield in the other. Your 4 block is one of the best blocks in the game. It lasts a long time, eats a lot and everything, and then your 5 is really good CC, so you can throw it out and get quite a lot of disrupts. If you're running shield, you should run vicious expression and drop bountiful blades for rending shatter. Mesmer, a lot of the weapons are okay, but it's kind of to their bad. You can also run axe, but you have to be very careful with your 3. Don't expect the damage. You're running axe entirely for the clone generation of the 2s. You'll drop the thing, so your clones will be spawning behind you, which means usually if you're using it on a push through, you'll be shattering into the middle of them. It's quite good for clone generation, but I prefer sword and dagger. I really recommend greatsword because the CC from 5, the berserker, the easy guaranteed clone, and mind stab's pretty good. In terms of utility, you can see I'm running the heal well. If you don't want to run Leer, you can run the Signet, and then you can use that to add additional berserkers. Nullifield is a guarantee, you always want to run it. It's one of the best cleanses and strips in the game in a single skill. It hits both. Usually you'll drop it in front when you're going for your focus pull. The range of Nullifield is enough that you'll put it in front and you'll be able to then pull. Then when you're going for a clash, if you put it on the clash, you'll be hitting both its cleanses and strips. So if we're like pushing into them in melee, you'll put it slightly ahead. You'll miss the first pulse, that's fine. The second and third pulses will be cleansing your squad and stripping a lot from the enemy. If you're on voice or it's arranged with the commander, run Veil. Most commanders will want 2 Veils. It just stealths your entire squad. It's one of the main reasons we bring Mesmers to squad. The only stealth skill in the game that doesn't have a target cap. Every other one is dependent on having a member in each party capable of doing it. If Veils are already arranged, or if you just don't want to, you're not comfortable calling it on voice, making sure it's clear when you've got your Veil down, when it's on cooldown, how long till it's back. Run Mimic over it. It inherits the cooldown of the next skill you cast. You'll cast Mimic, you'll cast Nullifield, and then you can cast a second Nullifield a second later. Nullifield will be your high priority for Mimic most of the time. Illusion could be if you're running it. For people running Illusion, I recommend being on voice. Res skills not on voice will often cause problems and conflicts because people won't know who's getting up. You'll have multiple people calling their skill at once, losing it because of somebody else stealthing it, and Transfusion will make you miss, and a lot more transfusions are running. Your elite, you run Gravity Well. Mass Invis has the 10-person target. Run it in small scale, otherwise just run G1. Runes and Sigils. Runes I run Durability because I run Utility, so I will always have Mesmer, I will always have Illusion. Whenever a commander wants them, I'll call them, so I run Durability just to ensure that I'm alive longer. It gives a little bit of boon duration, which is nice for your quickness or alacrity, whichever you're running. Sigils, Energy or Nullification. I recommend Energy, swapping weapons pretty consistently because you'll always be going for the strips from your 4 there. You'll want to get your pulls out often, and you want the consistent clone generations from alternating your weapons. Rarely am I on a weapon for longer than the 9 seconds, and the extra dodges are just really convenient. If you don't feel you need the dodges, then just run Nullification on one and Absorption on the other. It's just, you'll be stripping a bunch more boons constantly without really having to put any extra thought in. Actually playing the Mesmer, the easiest way to start, well, first, your shatters. Your 1 is pretty good damage, mostly it's for the strips. Your 2 is a bunch of Condi, but you're mostly using it for the strips, the alacrity, the quickness. Your 3 is the vulnerability, the daze is pretty good, and again, more strips, of course, it can double level up on the strips because you're dazing, which is a CC, which triggers the top trait if you're running it. Generally, I would run Vicious, and then your 4 is Distortion. Nothing can stop Distortion. It can't be stripped, it can't be interrupted. You can cast it whenever you're casting any other skill because it has no cast time. None of your shatters do as Chrono, which means you can cast them on any long cast time. And then 5, I recommend always making sure you throw out 1 clone. Whenever you continuum split, it starts, records every piece of information about you, so your health, your current cooldowns, your positioning, and leaves behind a little rift. If that rift gets destroyed, you get forced back. If you tap the skill again, you'll go back, or if it times out, you'll go back. While it's triggered, you can use any skill you want, and because the cooldown will be reset after, you'll be back to the state you were. Your highest value targets are your null field and your gravity well, mostly the gravity well. Occasionally you might split veil, that's if you're covering for 2 mesmers and the commander explicitly wants 2 veils. Otherwise you can run mimic instead of illusion and mimic it. Mimic cannot be affected by split, so just don't worry about that. Ideally you'll have everything. You'll split, you'll cast the valuable skills, you'll exit split, then you can mimic and recast null field. In a single split, you should generally pretty consistently be able to get off your null field, your gravity well, and all of your shatters. If you're in greatsword, you can also go for the 4, you can also go for the pull, but don't worry so much about them, just try to get consistent at your null field and your G well. In order to give yourself some extra time, you throw out the clone. So on dagger, on greatsword it's your 2, on sword it's your 3. If you don't have the clone, you need to pre-cast G well. All your shatters you can cast while casting other skills. This includes split. Split only triggers on the cooldown. In terms of the cools, pull is referring to you. Everybody else should obviously be pulling as well. The main target is to get your temporal curtain out. Be aware it does take a bit to cast before you can trigger it. You can G-Well, you enter continuous split, you can burst that early, you can G-Well a second time. Other things you'll be reacting to is on wells, drop your gravity well, you can drop your null field on well, or you can use it for your own pull, depending on the commander. A lot of it is just getting used to the timing on continuum split, remembering that you don't have the most time, because like full thing would be you do that, then you run in, you just shatter everything, it doesn't matter, you're back, and you have all of your skills. Like each one is stripping boons from an enemy. When you pop all 4, there's instantly 20 boons just torn from the enemy. The worst thing is they kill you, which will instantly send you back to your rift. Be careful where you're dropping your split, because if you drop it on arrow and you start circling around with the tag, then in about a second you're going to end up all the way back here, probably in a group of enemies. Get used to using your clones. The easiest start I would say would be sword shield, sword focus. Yeah, you won't be hitting much, but you'll be so unkillable with the blur from your 2 always available. You'll always have the clone 3 near enough, and you'll have your pull and block and a lot of CC there. It's like really nice way to start learning. Okay, so Virtuoso. You're dropping a lot of the utility running this. You can see the build's not too different. Run greatsword for the exact same reason. You can run either. Personally, I tend to run the damage slightly more because you're losing a lot of the disables. You have no G-Well, you're way more damagey. So the actual Virtuoso line, it gives you Aegis on every cast, which synergizes. You'll see I'm running Daredevil. In terms of blade generation, you will always have plenty just from dodging. You don't need to worry about it too much. You should be able to get 5 very, very easily. But your 4, your 2 on greatsword are really good. Your 3 is not safe anymore. It's a good skill, but it turns purely into a leap. You don't blink to the clone it summons, you just leap. If you hit, you'll get a blade, and then you can shadow step back. Be aware that the skill changes. If you're running dagger, which you can, all the same weapon stuff applies, all of them are fine. I'd prefer dagger slightly more on Virtuoso, just because you're getting a decent number of blades and you run high damage. So the 3 is really, really good to just dump on downs. But yeah, no massive changes. You don't generate a clone, you generate a blade. With 3, drop it. It can do a lot of damage, it can finish downs and apply a lot of pressure. The shields are the same, because Phantasm's still cast on Virtuoso, it's just they turn into a blade at the end. You can do a lot of damage just auto-attacking with 1. With all Mesmer skills, I recommend to disable their auto-attack. You need to be more aware of them. The greatsword is a pretty long cast, it can delay your other skills. and if you just keep randomly casting your 1, you're gonna hit yourself and die at some point from a reflex. Duelist Renewal, blocking or dodging, gives boons. Quickness, Fury, Regen, you're practically spamming dodging. Energy is guaranteed on this build. If you're not running Aegis, you can get a bit more damage from the second trait, but that's shorter range, and the extra damage I find tends to be less than you get from just rocking the extra boon. And Grandmaster, Fury's better, you inflict a lot of vulnerability and bonus damage from that. The Grandmaster is massive, especially since the change. You don't have to evade, all you have to do is dodge to generate your blades. Every time you evade, you're generating loads more blades. Every dodge will just generate one. Every time you dodge, you get Psychic Riposte, which means your next blade song, which are your shatters, is unblockable. Combine that with the previous build, near enough, where every shatter is stripping on every hit, suddenly you have a huge amount of unblockable, high damaging strips. This is why you're going to be getting more than a Chrono, because you're still running null field. Equipment changes. I run full berserkers. You're not generating any boons, you don't care about concentration, nothing in the game affects strips from your stats. You don't even need to worry about reflect from your blade songs, because they'll be unblockable every single time you cast them. So you can get a lot of damage on high value targets running this. One of the big things with Virtuoso is target prioritization and clicking through the zerg, because if you have no target, unlike a lot of classes, you can't just send out the skill. It's not like a berserker, you can't just create a burning line, you have to target something. It means on Virtuoso you should always be clicking someone at the back of a zerg. In terms of your shatters, it always follows the same trend. You have your damage, you have your condi, you have your CC, you have distortion. You don't really want to run dissonance because it will only strip on a single hit. Your main one is always going to be your F1. Your F2 is fine to cast if you're out of charges on your F1. Every time you'll be stripping with those. Your F3 you won't really want to cast because it turns it into one single thing that hits once, strips once, applies everything once. Whereas your 1 will be stripping 4 or 5 times every time you cast it. Your distortion is still distortion, cast it when you need it. A lot of the time you won't want to spend blades on it, so if you can, pop your F1 then distort straight after. Your F5 now is just an AoE that will be hitting 5 targets around you. You can pop it in melee because every hit will strip from every target still. It's a good one to just have running. Don't worry about spending blades on it. They increase the duration. So generally you'll get a lot more value spending the blades on your F1, F2, which you should have pretty regularly. Weapons, I still generally say greatsword, sword focus, run dagger if you want the range. If you're not going to kill yourself, it's good, but you can run sword. A lot of people run scepter on Chrono, which I should have mentioned, but they run it mostly for the block on the 2, I think, and I just find that the distortion, yeah, it locks you in place, but you're a Mesmer. It's very hard to kill a Mesmer that doesn't want to die. By the time you've finished being locked in place, enough people will have left you alone that you can just walk back, especially if you're running Commanders and Wanderers, because it's tanky or special. In terms of utilities, run Ether or Mirror, either's fine. The Reflect is quite nice, but just be aware it doesn't stop unblockable, which means you're still going to get hit pretty badly sometimes. Ether is just nice for more berserkers, and it's pretty good heal, and it generates every time you generate blades, so every time you're dodging you'll be healing as well. Again, Nullfield is such a strong skill. See, I have Blink and Sword of Decimation here. Blink is just useful especially if you're running sword, just because you can break stun and blink instantly really far, and again no cast time, so it doesn't interrupt anything. You might not need to run it if you're just running on tag, that's fine, in which case you can run Mimic, and then you can just mimic your null field each time. It's a lot of strips, a lot of cleanse. On Clash, it's pretty good. You can run feedback if you want the reflect. I don't bother because Firebrands will always have reflect fields up in front. Rain of Swords is kind of just decent. It's not the huge amount of damage, but it's some vulnerability, so it stresses cleanse, and it just applies a bit of pressure. It's nice to just drop on downs or to drop to pop Aegis, because it hits a lot. Pop down Aegis. Sword of Decimation is fairly long cast time, but it's good range, just ML 1200, it does more, so generally drop it on to lock down a Wells bomb. So when they drop Wells, you'll drop Nullfield and Sword of Decimation, you'll mob a bunch in it, they'll die. Hopefully you can use it to further spread a tail. Just be aware that cast time means you need to cast it slightly in front of where they're moving. Elite skill, the other three are just kind of bad skills overall. They don't bring enough to ever really consider running. So 1000 cuts it is. It's not the highest damage, but it's decent, and it's good for just dropping on downs. Like, if you're starting to move away, you can chuck 1000 cuts out, and it'll apply a decent amount of pressure, pushing them away from their downs and hopefully finishing a few. Or if not, it'll be enough to get them low to Bladesong Relic. Personally, I just run Daredevil. You're dodging constantly, you're generating energy by consistently cycling through your weapons to generate as many blades as you can, as quickly as you can, and every single time you're dodging, you're guaranteeing crits onto your blade songs, and it means you don't have to worry about having the pretty low crit runes. If you want to run Scholar, it's fine. I run Surging for the 25% move speed. Power, it boons, you're not generating a lot, but you get the occasional Fury, and every time you're dodging, you're getting some, so the extra time from that's nice. But mostly I just run it for the 25% move speed. Just allows you a bit more freedom. It's useful to catch up to tag, especially if you're locking yourself down a bit more. Any questions for either class?
I have no idea how to do continuums. So you press gravity wall and then continuums.
Yeah, a lot of learning Mesmer is learning which skills interrupt and which ones don't. With Greatsword, every skill queues except Mind Stab. For Continuum Split, it has no interrupt time, so you can use it on literally any skill, but Gravity Well's your high priority and longest cast time, so generally you'll start it in that. All of your shatters are free, you can just weave them in as much as you want. Unless you have a specific reason, you never need to pop your Continuum Split again to end it early. Or if I switch to the non-utility set, I would recommend to use 2. You have the clone that lasts a long time, and then you can start G-Well, you split all of this. From this point you can mimic Nullfield 1, so this is your second, that's your third Nullfield in a single engage. And you still have another G-Well for a lockdown as they're trying to escape. It's not the easiest thing to pull off in a fight because you're also focusing on movement. Enemies might CC you interrupting the full rotation. If you just start G-Well and then enter Continuum Split halfway through the bar and then Nullfield, you're going to always be getting most of the value out of it. Everything else you can add on is extra. Like the shatters, yeah, that is another 20 strips. But G-Well is such a strong lockdown that splitting it is the highest priority. That's the other thing with Mesmer. If you're fighting a big group and there's a random monster, one thing that I personally do is I'll chuck my 2, and then at that point my clone will just be there hitting the Shard until it dies. It gives me a good 10-15 seconds to just use other skills. It is a lot. Mesmer's pretty fast paced in order to maximize it because you're putting yourself on your own cooldowns, and suddenly you need to be aware that you're going to be repositioning yourself. I highly recommend making sure that your keybinds are better than default. You want them pretty close. I have shift for my shatters. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to ask.